Okay, so if you are a fan of Twitter, I've just put my Twitter handle there, which is at Kathy Kotiadis, and also the OR Society's Twitter handle, which is at the OR Society. And I think most people know that I'm a big fan of Twitter, and the OR Society is very active on there. And I think it's a great forum to share what we're doing and to just make sure people know about us. So when I was asked to do this talk, I was given the opportunity to choose anything I wanted to talk about. And I wanted to deliver something with honesty and to look at something that maybe couldn't be published, which is kind of my journey, how I've moved through combining methods. So let me just, hang on, let me see how many, leave that be. So I am only using my journey in this talk. That doesn't mean I haven't been influenced by all these OR people that have written things, but so I'm not sort of citing anything, but I have been influenced by a number of people. So the aim of the talk is to consider the importance of mixing methods for the combination, but also the individual methods. And I'm very passionate about both soft OR, problem structuring methods, and hard OR. And I really want people to embrace both sides of OR. And I want to kind of use my journey to show the benefits. So a lot of the time, the use of multi-methodologies, well, these days is going under different names. So you might find it under facilitative OR, systems thinking, behavioral OR. So it is going on, but we don't hear as much the word multi-methodology as we used to, especially at conferences. So I'd quite like to start hearing it a little bit more. And hopefully there might be a few reflections at the end that can trigger a conversation. So I'm going to start at the very beginning, which is my, what was I like before my PhD? How did I get to the method combination? Just show you my journey, and then I'll move forward. So prior to my PhD, I had experience of using simulation modeling in manufacturing. And I wasn't at all somebody who was interested in problem structuring methods or soft OR. I'm just wondering if we could turn off the alert that somebody's joining the room. I don't know if that's possible. So, you know, I really loved the software I was using. I was technically competent. When I used simulation in this manufacturing system, I could see the assembly cell that I had to model. It was, you know, just wonderful. I did struggle a little bit with the people that I had to work with, in the sense that, you know, I wasn't quite sure how to ask them questions or how to involve them, but I didn't worry so much because my main thing was to produce this model. And I thought to myself, I really want to do simulation modeling, whatever it takes. That is my calling. So when it came to doing my PhD, I knew I wanted to do simulation modeling, and a problem in healthcare came up. And I thought, yes, that's it. It's a huge problem. We've got a system for older people. It has to be modeled. And that's the way I'm going to go. However, when I started, I had a very different situation. So I had a system that wasn't visible, so I couldn't actually see it, unlike that manufacturing plant that I had got experience with. And I suddenly thought, I don't know how to do this, you know. And then all the imposter syndrome came up, and I thought, should I even be doing simulation modeling? And I was very fortunate in the fact that I had been taught a module in problem structuring methods. So I had the course textbook. Luckily, I bought it. So I went back to that and I started reading through it. And when I got to soft systems methodology, I thought, okay, I think this is the one for me. It seems to have tools. There's a structure there. I think I'll use this. So, and it did work. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of explain a little bit about the differences and the similarities so you can kind of understand the combination of methods. So within this room, there are going to be people that have got backgrounds in maths, engineering, and they are probably more comfortable operating within the hard paradigm. So think of that as your worldview, how you see the world, your philosophy. And then there are other people that may be comfortable with operating within the soft paradigm. So that's a different worldview. And the table that I've got up shows the sort of differences between the two, and I've taken this from Rosenhead. So one approach, so the hard approach, you've got overwhelming data demands. You're very focused on the data. With the soft paradigm, you might also be interested in the data, but you're very, very focused on people, judgments, things like that. People in terms of the hard paradigm are treated more like passive objects, whereas in the soft, they're more active objects. So it's quite different positions to start with. So before my PhD, I was firmly in the hard paradigm. I was thinking I was going to get a set of data, look at that, and then I'd be able to model. And clearly I couldn't do that moving into my PhD, which is why I had to think, right, I've got to speak to people, I've got to engage with them, I've got to find things out. Now let's look at these two methodologies in terms of the differences and the similarities. So on your left, you've got SSM. So this is the final version that at least I have seen from Chetland. And on the right, you've got the discrete, the simulation modeling process. So I'm going to kind of just quickly go through each of them and just then show the similarities. So in terms of SSM, you start off finding out about the problem situation, including culturally and politically. So I've got the tool sign because you've got tools such as rich pictures, analysis 1, 2, and 3 that can help you there. Then you would formulate a purposeful activity model or some purposeful activity models, again, tools to help you do that. You would then use these models to debate the situation, and at the end, once you've debated the situation, you're looking to take action. This action is usually feasible and desirable. So if you look to the right, so I'm sort of taking as the starting point with simulation modeling. People might argue slightly different versions. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go back there. Of the simulation modeling process, but I'm starting with conceptual modeling because I'm more driven by discrete event. So that, in terms of conceptual modeling, what does that mean? That has find out about the problem situation, determine the objectives, the model content, assumption simplifications, and data needs. Then you would create your computer model. You'd experiment, so you'd search the solution space, and then you would implement sometimes the finding or the model or whatever. So when you look at these two approaches, whereas at the philosophical level, you've got quite a lot of differences. When you get to the methodological level, you can see some similarities. So the first stage of SSM, you've got to find out about the problem situation. Well, in conceptual modeling, so the first stage of simulation, you've got to find out about the problem. So here, you've got to find out about the problem, whereas in simulation, you don't have any tools for that, in discrete event simulation at least. The second bit of SSM is formulate a model. And the second stage of simulation, again, model coding, so it's getting your model. Then you've got debate the situation in SSM. Experimentation is about searching the solution space. So that's, again, debating the solution space to some extent, looking at the solution space. The fourth stage in SSM is taking action, but also you could think of implementing the findings as taking action. So here we've got more similarities. So you can start to see that where you might have, where in simulation modeling you want to find out the problem situation, or maybe you can use tools from SSM about finding out about the problem situations. You could link them there, so you can see how there are opportunities for this combination. And there have been a number of papers even prior to my work, and obviously by the authors after my work, that looked at the combination. So luckily, if I were to go back and sort of reflect on my experience of combining SSM and discrete event simulation in terms of at the philosophical level, I've got a paper which I'm doing exactly that. I'm reflecting on that. And when I went back to this paper, because I hadn't actually read it, so it was published in 2006, probably written in 2004. So I hadn't really gone back to look at it in all this time. And I was pleasantly surprised to find out that I had been brutally honest about how I felt when it came to combining these two different methodologies coming from different paradigms. So if you were to ask me, was it easy as a novice to do that? Absolutely not. There were challenges with the discrete event simulation side, but also challenges with the SSM in terms of the combination. And I've got a little bit of an extract here, and this shows how brutally honest I was. I'm talking about the positive impact that each methodology had on the other, but I'm talking about the procedure being painful. And it's not the only paragraph where I mention that. It's actually a few times in this paper. And I'm talking about my uncertainty. So I clearly have this lack of confidence. And I'm really glad that I was brutally honest at that point. And I'm, very grateful to my co-author who probably encouraged me to do that. So that's John Mingus, but also to the, reviewers and the area editors. Because I'm not sure that a lot of papers have this brute honesty within them about, that it wasn't all easy, it wasn't all roses, I wasn't a natural at it. And I'm also talking about feeling uncomfortable because, nervous actually in this case, because of a lifetime of positivist training and then trying to switch to doing problem structuring. And also talking about whether this was the responsible thing to do. We're talking about a very important problem, a system for older people. Should I be trying out something new when there was so much at stake? So I'm glad I have it there, because I think if there are people who feel like that, and I certainly see it with my PhD students, that they do have these uncomfortable feelings. It isn't like a natural move when you're very comfortable within, programming, coding, to then try and interact with people trying to understand problems. So, so that's how I felt, in terms of how I view the world. So that paper really explains that aspect. So when it came to practically combining the methods, I've got another paper that I would like to share. And I think this particular paper is in the Journal of Simulation. And this talks, so it's the Journal of Simulation, and I'm talking about how soft systems methodology is used to get the simulation objectives. And within trying to achieve that, I had to extend one of the SSM tools and create what I called the performance measurement model. So, I'm talking about practically that not necessarily everything is given to you as you need it when you're combining methods. So you sometimes have to extend. Interestingly, I've got another paper. So this is not from my PhD, it was work that was done later. And in this paper, I'm talking about, so it's a standalone soft systems methodology paper. So there's no simulation in it whatsoever. And within this bit of work, I'm using the PMM. So something that came from a simulation need is now being used in SSM. And I think this is where you can see how through multi-methodology work, you can actually just enhance one of the methods afterwards. Okay, so as I was doing this work, I felt, especially towards the end of my PhD, I felt that I was starting to understand the importance of dealing with people, and especially at a group level. So when I started my PhD, I was sort of hiding the fact that I was using SSM because I wasn't very confident that I was, that I should be using it, that I was doing it right. So by the end, not only was I more confident showing it off, but I was more confident in engaging with people. And I remember a meeting right towards the end, and I think it was 4 or 5 people, and they were healthcare managers, and they were in my office and sitting around my computer, and we had a box of chocolates. And we started exploring different scenarios and talking about the situation. And this meeting that was meant to be maybe half an hour went on for hours. And that made me think, really, this is the way I should have done it. I should have worked with them as a group. So then I started thinking of the mode of engagement. So not just the philosophy, not just the methodology or the practicalities, but the mode of engagement. So that was how sort of PartySim emerged. And that was a case of taking things a step further. So it wasn't just the combination of soft systems methodology with discrete event simulation through the medium, through the mode of facilitated workshops and facilitated architecture. But it was trying to get this into a repeatable framework. So these are just a few of the papers that emerged from that line of research, and that was after following my PhD. So trying to take the early stages of the combination and making something that was more generic. So when I look at the contribution of each methodology to the other field, you can sort of see that really discrete event simulation benefited more, I would say, from this multi-methodology. And you can see it through PartySim because it's a discrete event approach or a simulation approach. And there are different things that went in from soft systems methodology. So the overall architecture, the overall philosophy, and then some tools to help in conceptual modeling. But what went back from simulation was this PMM. So what was developed to help with the objectives went back into SSM. However, it isn't just a case, in my experience, it hasn't just been a case of, keep sticking to these 2 methodologies, but the experience gained from combining 2 methodologies has led to other combinations. So this is a paper from more recent work, and it's not in healthcare. So PartySim was healthcare. A lot of the work that you've seen has been in healthcare. This one isn't, it's in the transport industry. This one has a different problem structuring method. In fact, it's not actually currently defined as a problem structuring method, but I think it will be one that comes into the fold. It's called hierarchical process modeling. And this was something that the research associate Will Jones wanted to use. And I was sort of quite keen to say, well, okay, let's try something else, a different problem structuring method with simulation. And in this case, it wasn't discrete event simulation, but it was hybrid. So it's a combination of discrete event with agent-based simulation. So all these earlier steps helped me support Will in combining hierarchical process modeling with hybrid simulation. So I think when you start off and you do multi-methodology work, it's like a foundation where you can go on and do other stuff. So if I were to try and advise somebody, how how could you do this maybe better than I did? This is not exactly how my path was, but I would probably suggest that you learn each individual method and apply it in practice, so you get a really good experience of each approach. So I wasn't really given that opportunity because when it came to my PhD, I had to use SSM straight away, so I hadn't had that individual experience of SSM prior to my PhD. There are things that I feel are important to consider when you're doing this multi-methodology work. So asking the question, what do they need from each other, the approaches? How do you combine them? So what part of the process goes with the other? What are the contexts that they're useful in? What is the mode that suits this combination? So is it expert, partial, or fully facilitated? And once you have sort of answered these questions from the multi-methodology, I think it is important to try and create a framework in the same way that PartySim has emerged. And that is because I feel that these frameworks are useful, so you don't reinvent the wheel each time. And even if somebody doesn't use the framework as you have it, at least you've given them some idea of how you have combined it, what are the reasons. And I think the mode of engagement should be clear, for example, if you're using a facilitated architecture, and to have clear guidance for novices. So then you can look at other combinations. As I said, I've moved to other combinations now and repeat the cycle. And I think it is important when we have these methodologies to consider how they might be combined. So let me go through some reflections now. I'm happy to report that I don't feel uncomfortable anymore when I combine different things. I feel okay about it. I don't worry. I feel that there is a progression, and you learn. One of the key things that I've understood over time is that these developers of the different methods or the approaches, I don't think they mind if you change things in order to enhance the combination. Problems are getting a lot more complex than they used to be, and there is a greater need for the engagement of stakeholders, especially because power is a lot more distributed now. So you don't really have this single decision maker. You've got to bring more people on board. And what you find when you look at different funding organizations, especially in healthcare, you find that they really want this stakeholder engagement. Now, the weird thing is that the EPSRC, and I'm going to come back to this at the end because I think it's an important conversation, doesn't actually mention soft OR or PSMs in its prioritization. So I'm coming back to this later on. So in terms of problems and engaging stakeholders, we need to know how to engage them. It's very important that we don't hide our process, what questions we ask them, how do we run workshops, how do we design them. We've got to be clearer on that. And PSMs are the sort of medium in engaging stakeholders. I feel that diversity in the research team is important. And part of me saying this is that if you were to look at my journey, we're talking now that I'm reporting work over, a couple of decades, and it might be quicker if, a person that has expertise in PSMs works with a hard OR person in terms of combining them. You'll probably save a lot of time. You'll probably have to work quite closely with them. And the other thing is that it's quite hard to keep up with a lot of communities of practice. So, in my case, I've had the PSM community, the simulation community, and the healthcare community. And if you want to really keep in touch with all these communities, you've got to go to their conferences, their meetings. If you go to a conference, what stream do you choose? So that's another question. So if you do have more diversity in your research team, then one person can follow one community and the other, and it's a little bit easier. Another reflection is that although I don't feel like I hear the term multi-methodology as much as I used to in terms of titles, it is more of an accepted practice than it was, I feel, when I started. I feel I had to justify myself more. And I am guilty of publishing under other research clusters such as facilitated OR, behavioral OR, hybrid, and so on. So that makes it a little bit harder to track progress. So some other final thoughts that I have, and this is motivated, my first point is motivated by my by a collaboration that's over the last few years with a colleague here at the Kent Business School, Paola Scapar. I think she might be in the audience. And I feel that mathematical modeling needs more integration with problem structuring methods for impact. And there is a lot of room for that type of research. So whatever we've done seems to be working, but I think a lot more could be done. And I think there should be philosophical reflections, methodological tools, techniques, mode of interaction. All of these aspects should be covered. Another crucial step is that there should be teaching of soft OR PSMs in all OR courses. And I don't think that's the case at every university. I mean, we are guilty of not having that currently, although there are plans to do that. And if you think back to what I said, when I started my PhD, I thought to myself, oh, I don't know how to interact with people, but I remember doing this module, and whilst I didn't remember the content, I had the book and I knew to go there and to read it and to try and do it properly rather than create some ad hoc approach, which I may have had mixed results. I also feel that the facilitated mode of interaction should be taught too, and that's not just with in terms of teaching problem structuring and soft OR modules, but as part of hard OR module. So I try and do that with my simulation module. I know that's easier for me because, you know, I've developed party sim, so, you know, I have embedded it. But I do think it is important that students that do quantitative methods understand they have to interact with these models. Well, they have to allow groups of stakeholders to interact with these models too, and it's easier to sort of explain how you might do them while they're still at university. So the other thing that I touched upon earlier is that it's important, I feel, that that problem structuring methods and soft OR are mentioned on the EPSRC website. So let me show you what's mentioned right now. So this I found earlier and I put it up, and this was what was given to me also when I sat on a panel in May. So I sat on the mathematical sciences, and if you, I don't know if you're aware of this, when you're on the panel, you're given a certain number of grants to present there, and you've got the reviewers' comments, and you're given a set of links for the different areas, and what they sort of say to you, depending on where you are, what your role is for each bid, is that you have to consider the importance of the area for the EPSRC. So as you can see from this list, there's nothing really there's nothing there on problem structuring methods or soft OR. And if you see how much SSM has helped simulation, especially in terms of party sim, it's a real shame, because I feel that problem structuring methods can enhance hard OR methods. So the EPSRC, which is looking at these methodological developments, that should be part of it. And as it happens, party sim was EPSRC funded, And when I got the funding for it, I used the strategy document at the time, which actually mentioned soft OR and problem structure and how important it was for the UK. So I feel we've kind of made a step backwards because now it's not mentioned. So hopefully that could be a point to be discussed. Now, I don't know how I'm doing for time, so I'll go for questions. And after the questions, I'll show you something that I found if we have time. So I don't know if I should stop sharing. What would you like, Gavin?
Yeah, let's stop sharing, and then we can see who's putting their hand up, waving. Yeah, David started the applause. So yeah, thanks very much, Kathy. That was really interesting and very useful. We certainly have got time for questions and a bit more discussion. So if anyone does want to ask a question, then please do put your hand up, shout up. Christina, you've got your hand up first to the.
Hi, Kathy. That was fantastic. That was really, really interesting. So lovely to hear your journey. What advice would you give to PhD researchers who are starting out in the field now, who actually would really like to use a bit of mixed methods, about how they should approach things to make sure that they're going to be able to get publications, that they're going to be able to have a path of progression, and to make sure that they're still able to do what they like at the end of it?
That's a really good question, and I'd say that my PhD students are in that category too. I think it's very important to be transparent about what you're doing. So that, if you think about it as I think it's three layers. So the philosophical, the methodological, and then the mode of interaction. So, and then obviously you've got other aspects that you could cover, but these are three things that you can talk about, and you can possibly even split your papers. So as you saw, one paper purely on the philosophical side, another paper that could talk about really how are you putting the technique with the other one, your more standard papers with multi-methodologies. And then another one on the mode of interaction. If you're using workshops, how are you embedding these into the process? How are you designing them? What questions did you ask? What did the stakeholders think? So there's a lot of aspects that you can write about, and there's probably other combinations of things. But I think rather than reinvent the wheel or even make it sound like it's really easy, just to kind of talk about the challenges, because I think people are not honest enough about the fact that it is hard. It's really hard to interact with stakeholders. It's not that easy. And we've got to give that some weight as well. And we've got to become really good at it, because we've got these really big problems that we've got to address. And we depend on these stakeholders, and we depend on having good interactions with them and maintaining relationships over a period of time, because we want, at the end of the day, for the findings to be implemented. And we can't forget about that. It is not about producing good models. It is about helping them interpret the models, the findings, and how they might put these findings into practice.
Tony?
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. Kathy, that was great, a great presentation. I really enjoyed that. It was interesting to hear you talk about the difficulties when you started out as well. And I'm just wondering about that in terms of, having worked with lots of PhD students over the years, when they were talking about mixed methods, they very often came across the problem of what's called commensurability. And I'm just wondering how you tackled the difference. I mean, you mentioned philosophy once or twice, and you've got that paper early on in the work that talks about philosophy. But there are very different philosophies involved in the mixing of those methods. And I'm just wondering if you can mix paradigms in the way I'm not saying you've suggested that you're mixing paradigms, but do you think it's possible to mix the paradigms or just mix the methods?
That paper's Tony, that paper's a real post-mortem of the situation. So I would say I had this reflection at the end. So the paper was written at the end, and I didn't know at the time what I was thinking, but I tried to do that and to say exactly what I was thinking at each point. So I think there were times that I was very much in the hard paradigm. There were times that I was in the soft, and this didn't really necessarily match with what method I was using. So just to give you an example, even within the simulation part, the system didn't really exist, the broader system. It didn't work at the time. So I couldn't ask the question, what's there? But I had to ask the question, what could be there? So again, you're starting to make this softer simulation when you start using that soft paradigm. And I try to identify, so you can't sort of see it as a one point in time, but a collection of points in time where you put on a different hat. And what you have to accept is that you can be both. You don't have to worry. You can be both, as long as I felt it was very cathartic to write about it. So I felt that by writing about it and explaining how I was thinking, it got rid of that feeling, that uncomfortable feeling that I'd done something really dirty. And I thought, no, actually, I understand why I did it. I know that it was okay. It's fine.
Thanks very much. Ontological oscillation, I call it quite often.
Okay.
John, you're up next. You're muted, John. We can't hear you, John. Oh, there we go.
I should be up now. Okay, be thankful for that. I was going to stir the pot a little bit. For reasons I won't go into, I looked at the report mentioned for the heads of OR, the latest inside OR, about the soft system methodologies. And when you read that report, you suddenly get the idea that any serious academic who's gone into the area has got their own personal soft methodology that they would promote. There are so many different approaches being attached to all the different names sitting around. And it strikes me that this may indicate a problem with the whole thing. In a way, for years I was doing what you might call OR without actually realizing it was working in industry. And in particular situations, success was achieved, and I say we, because it wasn't just me being able to write good programs for an aging computer. We used about 6 hours a week of computer time, this bit of GEC, Indirect it was then, to do what we're doing. But I also talked to junior managers. We were discussing what we could do with the data we could make available to make things happen better. And when the GEC reorganized itself, the bit I was in moved from Liverpool to Lincoln, I was talking to one of the people involved who moved on to a different firm, and he said until it broke, we didn't realize what a professional shower we were, meaning that in some respects we're highly disorganized, didn't have lots of discipline meetings and records. But because we're interacting and kicking ideas around, what we were doing was successful. In fact, it was successful to the point it made the bit I was in profitable by the 15% return or more of the Arnold Weinstock standard. And boy, that's not what wasn't being an easy thing for businesses inside the thing that GEC eventually became to achieve. But so in a way, we need a methodology for sorting out how you describe the soft system approach. You may be going to use a particular technique to actually deal with the numerical side of a problem. You actually got to quantify and get some deliverables. The way you get into the thing, accumulate the evidence, get the actors in the picture, is going to be quite idiosyncratic and very much depend on the personalities of the people you're working with. And that's one of the factors you've got to tune into the whole deal. But certainly it's very worthwhile for looking at the papers put together heads of all, because I had to look at it myself for reasons. I'm looking for is there some handy short list of all the soft systems? And you suddenly realize there's a torrent of the things. So it's a good read in itself, and I recommend it to you. But certainly it's nice to see somebody else's journey into the world of OR. And it's great fun, really. That's what I say.
Thanks, John. I would say that a lot of people in practice are doing the mixing, and they know, and they're just not passing on the knowledge because it's like a secret, you know, an industry secret. And us academics are sort of possibly behind the curve. You know, in industry there might be approaches that are brilliant, but we never get to find out of them because, you know, that's the unique selling point of the consultant. But we as academics and educators, we have to help novices. We have to write about things and move the art into a science. So, you know, I agree with everything you said, but just to say that I think it is important that we write about it.
Yeah, but problem, see, now that gives us a problem. I mean, in a way, back in the ranch years ago, some people might have said I'm arrogant because I would talk to people of what I was doing, how it worked. We even used to arrange with people out of the office I was in working in the production control area to sit with us on Monday night, actually helping to run the program through the computers. I didn't consider anything. If people wanted to know what was going on, I would tell them. It didn't bother me because I was there not to come with produce clever programs. I was there to make sure we could still make turbochargers that were going to get out the door. But some other people, they got a little bit of knowledge and they cling it to their breast as something tricky. And the academic problem is you've got to hang on to what you're doing to be able to write your next paper that you get published and get your brownie points. So you've got to have your secret 1 minute, and then you've got to communicate the secret after it's safe to do so. And that is actually a problem for the academic world. You know, for your own reputation's sake, you may have to be a little bit coy about what you're doing until you get it published in the right way.
Thanks, John. Let me ask a question while others are maybe thinking of others. Do you think it's possible to quantify the impact of formally adding the sort of PSM stuffs to the front end of hard OR problems, or is that a step too far? As we've already said, I think a lot of practitioners do this, but not in a formal way, and maybe making it more formal moves it on further.
Okay, that's a really good question. So I wanted to say one thing. It isn't, when I started off, I was front-ending it, but by the end, this isn't the case anymore. I think that PSMs are also just as useful at the end of the process. So it is, there are so many benefits to having stakeholders engaged throughout the modeling process, the hard OR modeling process. So I'd say that both the front and the end, because that is the way to engage groups. Now, in terms of quantifying it, quantifying the impact, what I could say is that if I hadn't engaged a problem structuring method, a formal problem structuring method, I think it would have taken me longer to do. I would have had to go around the loop of asking individual people. I did actually ask a lot of individual people, but if I didn't have a structured way of asking individual people during my PhD, because then after my PhD I moved to group work, but early on, I would have gone round in circles, asking random questions, feeling more confused. So you've got to remember, I was a novice, and that is the problem. It's time. Time is money too.
Sure, absolutely.
Sorry.
Paula, you're up next.
Yeah, just a comment more than a question. I was actually in the audience, but I apologize, I had my video off because I was actually driving the car back from picking up my daughter. So I fully agree with Kathy that there is a strong need to have software modules embedded in all our programs. I have to admit I was one of the skeptical or hard OR researchers at the beginning, but then having worked with Kathy on a few projects throughout the years, I'm fully convinced now that you do really need software to facilitate engagement with stakeholders and to ensure the uptake of your findings at the end of the process. Another thing that I had the pleasure to work with Kathy on is the application of software also to problems in developing countries. And I think especially in developing countries, the problems are so complex. They have so many stakeholders from poor communities to ministries, like a variety of people that need to be involved, that now I don't see how you can frame mathematical models without the software help. So I was just going to ask Kathy whether she sees a direct way of using the software frameworks in developing countries, or if there are adaptations maybe that they need to be made to adapt software methodologies to address the complex problems in the developing world.
I actually think adaptations are needed constantly for the methods. In the same way we're adapting, let's say, simulation. We started off with discrete event, system dynamics, Monte Carlo, then we get agent-based. Now we've got hybrid where we're combining bits and we're adapting as we're going along. In the same way, these problem structuring methods need to be adapted for the audience. These were largely developed for a particular culture, a particular level of education, and we are engaging people that may have, you know, different levels of education. We may have to use other ways, not, you know, now we're kind of doing a lot of problem structuring methods with, whether it's post-it notes where you write something or you use software where you write something, it still requires you to know how to write. If you're engaging communities where, you know, you've got people that may have a different level of education and you want to level the playing field, you might have to use pictures or dance or something else. So I do think we have to think very differently. We also have now the other challenge that we've moved, and especially during the pandemic, from the face-to-face interactions to the online interactions. And actually we had a great panel at Euro on online interactions with groups and the direction that we're moving into. So there is so much research that can be done. So it's not a case of just combining mathematical modeling with problem structuring. We still have to adapt the problem structuring methods to these new situations, contexts in the developing world, as you say. We might be talking to people that have a completely different culture, so the way they communicate and interact is differently, and these approaches don't quite fit those interactions. They need something else there. So there's loads of work that can be done, and all this work needs to be funded because we cannot work for free on this. And you know, and these funding councils like the EPSRC, if we are to develop and have impact with these mathematical approaches, we have to embed them with soft approaches, and these soft approaches have to be, well, we at least have to see problem structuring methods and soft OR in that list.
Agree.
Okay, thanks everybody. Just a quick trailer. If anyone's interested in coming along to Kathy's workshop at the annual conference, Problem Structuring Through the Medium of Dance, I'm sure that'll be very popular. Okay.
Let me think. Let me show you one thing before we stop. This was a funny thing that I found. So maybe people might stop talking to me after this. So, but I thought it was so funny, and I hid the slide, but I'll just show you quickly. I wasn't sure if I had time. So just remember that this. Let me share. this was something I wrote a very long time ago. A very, very long time ago. I'm just going to remind you that. And in fact, it was such a long time ago. Maybe it was John that actually wrote it rather than me. I'm going to blame him. So this is me trying to doing this post-mortem of problem structure. You know, why I could use problem structure and methods. So I've got this thing. So I'm trying to justify myself, and I've put and the fact that women are better at one of the most important elements of communication, which is listening, as they do not interrupt as much as men. I've even
Can I just stop you there?
Yeah, go on. Have you all clicked off?
No, we're still here, don't worry. We were listening.
So, you know, when your PhDs are worried about what they might write, 3 reviewers, a co-author, area editors thought that was brilliant, clearly, because they left it inside my paper. It was such a funny surprise to find it.
Great, super. Well, in the interest of time, we do have to get on to the really interesting stuff for today's meeting. Kathy was obviously just the warm-up act. 2021 finances coming up, come on. Just take a quick moment to thank Kathy for her time and her input. That's really good. Thank you, Kathy.